Hello and welcome to the Wire Talks. I'm Sidharth Bhatia. Both houses of parliament had discussed the Waqf amendment bill till late at night, and now, after the assent of President Murmu, it has come into force. Political reaction has been swift in coming. Opposition leaders have said that the law will reduce the autonomy of Muslims and take away control of their institutions from them. Many cases have been filed, and the Supreme Court, when it opens after a few days, will have to take a decision on when it wants to hear these cases. What exactly are Waqf properties? What was the law which has been amended? And why has the government tried to amend it? What happens now? To discuss and explain this issue, I am joined today by Shadan Farasat, senior advocate who practices in the Supreme Court and has fought many constitutional cases of importance. Welcome to the Wire Talk, Shadan Farasat.
Thank you for having me.
Shadan, for a lay audience, could you start by explaining what Waqf is and what Waqf properties are?
So, Waqf is in effect a charity in the charitable trust which you create in the name of Allah, the God, and it's an Islamic concept. So, you take any of your property and you sort of devote it to the God. And the purpose behind, so this thing is, it's always devoted to Allah, and that's the God. But the purpose can be anything. So it can be for education of children. It can be for welfare of a group of people. It can even be for welfare of animals. There can be a Waqf for welfare of horses, or it can be for anything. So anything imaginable under the sun, there can be a Waqf for that. And the idea is, as a charity, you have something excess with you which you want to give in charity. So it's a concept of a trust, a charitable trust under the Islamic scheme of things. That's pretty much what it is. Otherwise, it's open-ended in terms of what its purposes can be.
Now, when you create such a charity for whatever purpose in the name of the Lord, who does control pass through? Who manages it?
Yes, so there are people. So there is supposed to be a mutawalli who's, so the charity, of course, the beneficiary, just like any trust, the beneficiary is supposed to be the entity or the person or the purpose for which it is intended. And then, but you have to, like any trust, you have to manage. The trust has to be managed by human beings, and for that purpose, you have a mutawalli who's effectively like a manager, and his job is to manage the trust in the interest of the beneficiaries. Just like in any other trust, you have a trustee, and in that sense, the mutawalli's job is to manage. Of course, that's the classical notion of what a Waqf is. But in terms of in India, there was obviously a statutory intervention in the 70s, and which was in the nature of a regulatory intervention. It did not seek to do away with the concept, but it just sought to give it a codified form, a structure in line with what already existed, but a clearer structure which is more well defined. And that was the Waqf Act of the 70s, which was passed. And there, of course, you had a Waqf board who had to look after, keep a list of what items have to be there, and etc. for management of the Waqf. But really speaking, is in the classical sense, is the mutawalli who has to manage the Waqf.
So there must be, let's say, even in a small town, there must be scores of Waqf property, right?
Yeah, that is correct. All over India, you have a lot of Waqf properties. Yes, correct.
Yeah, but let's take a small town, in which there are several Waqf properties, and then it gets multiplied and aggregated. What happens to all those properties after this codification? Where do they pass into the hands of some local authority, or do they remain individual Waqf charities which are managed on their own?
So you see, there are two or three things. One is, of course, the nature of the board itself and what the composition of that board will be. Now, there you have had the introduction is of two non-Muslim members of the Waqf board will be introduced. So that it's a religious concept. It's important, right? So in any religious concept, the idea normally is that it's the people from that religion who control or are part of the management, and it's not outsiders, not for any other reason, not because they are not fit to be, but because it is for people who belong to that religion. So by very definition, it is like that, not for any other reason, right? So that's one. So that is changing. Importantly, there are a whole range of amendments which are here in this. What you have flagged, what you are indicating or adverting to, is really what is. There are a lot of Waqf properties where there is a dispute between, say, some government authority and the Waqf, saying that who does it belong to, either on the extent of the property, either on the margins, or about the entire property. Now there is in the amendment, one of the sections which has been introduced says that if there is a dispute between the government, existing dispute between a government and a Waqf as to whether a property belongs to the Waqf or not, then from the minute the act comes into force, that property will be deemed to be a government property. So it ceases to be a Waqf property in effect. It's a proviso in section 3C of what has been now introduced. So there are obviously, because Waqf, there are so many Waqfs, and therefore obviously there are a large number of disputes with one government agency or other, some very consequential, some minor, some some not of great consequence. But the effect of this deeming fiction is, and now today the act has been in fact given the approval of the president day before yesterday, if I'm not wrong, and today it has also been notified in the Gazette. So really, in that sense, it is very much on the statute.
It's the law now.
Yeah, it's the law now. Only one thing I have to check if it has if the date of operation from when it, because sometimes it says that it will be notified and different sections are notified differently. I have not yet seen the notification if it has come into operation in the sense it is operational on the ground, but certainly it is in the statute book. There may be a separate notification needed. I'm not sure because this is today's development. But be that as it may, the point is whenever it is fully effective, from that date, you can imagine the number of disputes which could be there vis-a-vis government authorities or agencies. And for all of that, the deeming fiction is now that it ceases to be a Waqf property. So it's a provision of great consequence and very, very anti-Waqf in that sense. By one stroke of pen, by one proviso, you have effectively for the moment converted all Waqf properties where there is a dispute into non-Waqf properties, irrespective of the merits of the dispute. I mean, in some cases, maybe the government has a great case that is actually a government land and not Waqf land. But there could be equally well so many cases where the Waqf will have a great case. So where was the occasion then to convert each of these disputes into in favor of the government and with such a deeming fiction?
No, but there must be some without any disputes. I mean, I'm just playing.
No, there will be a large number of them. So obviously there are a large number of Waqf.
What happens to them? What happens to them?
So every Waqf, no, it's not as if the Waqf ceased to be Waqf just because of the passage. There's no provision as such here which makes it's not in that sense an act which undoes the concept of Waqf or Waqf properties per se. It doesn't do that. It brings in amendments into the existing Waqf scheme, and there are some amendments like the one I indicated which are quite problematic from that front. But it's not as if that every Waqf property, irrespective of the fact whether there is dispute or no, ceases to be a Waqf at all. That's not the case at all. So Waqf properties continue to be Waqf properties. But if there is a dispute with the government, then from today onwards, they will, or whenever it's actually notified, they will cease to be treated as Waqf properties unless another report comes. There's a whole procedure in it. But the point is, for the time being, it will cease to be treated as a Waqf property.
And so the government will have not just effective but total control over those properties.
Correct. And it will in also, for instance, there are other issues as well. Like, for instance, there's a provision which says if there's a dispute with in respect of with Archeological Survey of India, correct? Then also it is the Archeological Survey of India's claim which will trump the other claim. Now, for instance, in the case of the Sambal mosque, that's which has been in the news for a long time. That's the issue which arises there, because I think the government, the ASI is now claiming that, listen, this is a ASI property. The Waqf Act has come into force. Therefore, really, this mosque cannot be a Waqf mosque. It's a ASI property now. So those kind of things, I mean, basically in terms of changing the status quo with one stroke of pen without really necessarily the underlying material and factual basis in each of those cases is the main problem which this act is going to cause on the ground.
So Shadan, theoretically, I mean, and practically, going forward, a dispute I won't say will be manufactured, but a dispute may arise about, let us say, a very, very important work property between that and some government agency. And by that token, the government will take over that property. Does it work like that, or uh, are these only disputes which already exist?
No, so obviously this applies to existing disputes, but this will also apply to future disputes. So, which have not yet arisen. So you could have disputes which will arise, and then once the dispute arises, the deeming fiction comes into operation. Of course, eventually, whether the property is Waqf or not will be determined by the district collector under this new scheme. That also is problematic, because even that eventual determination is by effectively a agent of the government. I mean, who more than a district collector is the face of the government at the district level? It is the district collector. All of us know that. All of us have been brought up with that. District collector is the government as far as the district is concerned. So in a dispute with the government, to have one, in effect, one side decide that dispute is quite problematic from a whole bunch of constitutional principles, which is separation of powers, fairness in adjudication, independence in the adjudicative process. All of those are compromised. You could have had, even, I mean, not that our tribunals are necessary, all of them are great, but at least the tribunals with some kind of a appointment process which is separate, etc., retain a element of independent functioning. It's not an officer of the government deciding the dispute in respect of the government. So that is another problem, that you have given all those powers now, which was earlier with a survey officer who was relatively independent, to a district collector. And in those kind of disputes, what is the chance, you tell me, if a government wants a district collector to decide a matter a certain way, what is the chance that the district collector is going to decide the matter in favor of the Waqf? It's almost nil, correct? So the fairness in that adjudicative process, you should have had an independent tribunal, or you should have even left it to the courts. That's still a far fairer mechanism than a district collector deciding. District collector is effectively the executive arm of the state, which is going to decide whether the property belongs to the state or to the Waqf. That's hugely problematic. I think on constitutional principles, that's hugely suspect, that provision.
So the dice is totally loaded in favor of the government in this, and
Correct.
manipulation is possible. Manipulation
Yes.
is theoretically possible.
Yes, and not just manipulation. I mean, I would say even without manipulation, the nature of the entity, which is the deciding authority for some of the most crucial aspects, is itself is an arm of one of the sides which is part of the dispute. It's like saying me and you have a dispute, Sidharth, and you effectively are going to decide the dispute, right? So what's the point of having that adjudication process? Or your agent will decide the dispute. Let's say not you, but me and you have a dispute, and your nominee will decide the dispute. So what chance do I have? Of course, you're going to choose a nominee which is going to be suiting you.
Now, you mentioned the Sambal mosque, which is very much in the news, and in fact, now because there is a dispute with ASI gets control of it. But there could be, I was just thinking in terms of other big mosques or educational institutions, or say ASI, something standing on ASI land, which is well known that it's on not on ASI land, but which is maintained by the ASI, and that could clearly go in favor of the government, and those could be created politically, as it were.
No, that is true. That is
Those
true.
disputes could be created politically. Now there is a political element that comes into the picture. Sambal, after all, was a political issue.
No, I agree with you absolutely. So there can be a whole range of disputes which are not there on the ground. In fact, all disputes in the Indian context on religious sites have a very strong political nature. I mean, be it 100 years ago or 300 years ago, I mean, they're all disputes which have a very, a very important political aspect to it. At least the people who push it, the kind of narratives which are created, all of that has a very strong political element. So the fact that you have this structure now, I guess I fully agree with you that if a political establishment were to create disputes and put it in that direction, it is a system which is very much tuned in for generation of such disputes, and then for resolving such disputes against the Waqf property.
So one of the people who have opposed it tooth and nail have said that the religious autonomy, the community autonomy of Muslims gets completely taken away. Now, that is obviously the case as you are explaining it. But does this mean that a large part of what is crucial to the Muslim community, the Muslims, is now no longer in their hands? So they are bereft of something very, very crucial that was really a part of their entire structure.
Yeah, so I'll answer that in two parts. See, one is, of course, that in some ways this has the potential of converting a lot of Waqf properties into non-Waqf properties. That is true. That is undoubtedly true of this act. However, despite the proviso, it's not as if eventually everything will necessarily go there. I mean, the Waqf property will be lost. So a section of it may be lost, and therefore for the purpose those properties were being used will also be lost. Therefore, it's important that this act is properly challenged in the courts. And then, I mean, some parts of these acts are clearly unconstitutional. There are few provisions. I mean, I've flagged a couple of them, but there are many more which are clearly, in my view, constitutionally suspect. And the court would have to look at them quite closely. Now, if those challenges were to succeed partly or substantially, then of course, that to that extent, the problem will stand resolved. But let's assume that the challenges are not immediately heard, etc. I think from a Muslim community perspective, it's also important that whatever is today in the Waqf, correct, you also use that well. I mean, one of the criticisms has been that the Waqf properties, even prior to this, have actually not been used for the purposes for which they were meant, and that's a legitimate criticism, because that is, I mean, as anybody who understands how Waqfs operate in most of, at least North India, I can say with some level of authority, barring few Waqfs, a lot of them are not maintained properly. There are a whole host of reasons. So the idea is, yes, you may lose something, but what you have, I think, if anything, this act has, if there's a positive side to this act, if there could be one, it is that you should realize what the potential of something like this is, and then use it for the economic and socio-economic development of a community, which is anyways lagging behind on all socio-economic parameters compared to all other groups and social strata. So I think that is something which different groups within the Muslim community, especially those who are in charge of different Waqfs, the mutawallis and the groups who are around it, should now it's an opportunity, although it's also something which you will contest. But at the same time, I also see it as an opportunity to use what is available in a far better way than what it was being so far used.
So, are you suggesting that many of these were either languishing or being abused, or are you just saying that that becomes so big that the people in charge were simply ignoring it?
It's a
I
mix
mean,
of,
is it because of benign negligence, or is it because of purposeful negligence?
It's both. In different cases, it's different. So in some cases, there would be benign negligence in the sense that, you are not in a position to manage it. The people who are in charge, despite their best intention, don't have the wherewithal to manage it. There are other issues. The government authorities are being difficult. The municipal corporation is not helping. Like, there can be 10 other issues, right? Like, so sometimes it can be a state of benign neglect, or the government authorities neglect, which is not, because to manage any property, you need the assistance a little bit of the government agencies, at least to cooperate, right? In terms of even proper cleaning around the property, etc. The municipality has to do it. So some of it will be that, but some of it is also that people have been sitting on these properties in terms, like there's a Waqf, but really we have been using it not so much for the purpose intended, but for their personal sort of gain, right? Like, you're deriving some monies. It's, the socio-economic condition of Muslims in India is not particularly great. So a whole host of people, for them, they don't have any alternative source of income. So they are using this only as a personal source of income, correct? Now, so those kind of things are also there. So I guess it's a mix of both. I mean, one can't generalize, and I'm not saying all Waqf properties are also that. Some properties are also being maintained very well. They're also being used for the purpose it is. But certainly there is a large chunk of these properties which have not been used historically in the manner in which it was intended, for the purpose or for the benefit for which it was put through. And I think it's a wake up call now, that at least now start using it with the fullest intent for what it was meant for.
So there have been, some stories have started emerging, and of course we knew about them, of how work properties have been signed off by trustees for purposes entirely to build a skyscraper, to build many other ways. And if that happens, is there any way to undo that, or
Yes,
is
of
that
course. No, there is
the
legal
final
mechanism.
answer?
No, there is a legal mechanism. I mean, of course, you have the whole legal system, including writ courts available for all of those purposes. But you are right that one of the things which has been, which has been flagged, is that properties or lands which were prime lands owned by Waqf have been sold by the trustees at good cost, with basically for private benefit.
Yeah.
And I mean, I won't go into individual examples because it's probably not worth doing that. But nevertheless, we know of enough examples of prime land in Bombay or in Delhi, which have been sold, which were work properties but sold by trustees or disposed of in a manner which was illegal. And then we know there are commercial complexes or something else which has come up there, right? And those prime lands could have been, of course, used for very, very useful purposes, for education, for colleges, for hospitals. I can imagine so many different things. So I guess that is a problem, and that is a problem which everybody should realize and try and address, because it's also, while it is a problem, the Waqf Act, and it is hugely it does really reduce the element of community control over these properties, and increases the government interference to a very large extent. Nevertheless, it's not as if the properties are going to be gone overnight. You're going to have access to a large number of properties, and even now you can use it well. So I would commend that line of action along with contesting. It should be a wake up call to say, listen, we have slept over this. There's a problem, yes, with what the government has done, and we're going to, of course, contest it fully because it's wrong. But at the same time, there is error within what we have been doing and how we have been running, and try and rectify that.
In the long list of, there was always this fear that the BJP or the Hindutva forces had this long list of promises that they had been making over the years. Article 370, Uniform Civil Code, and much more, Ram Temple, etc., etc. But the Waqf was never on the kind of a. It was never something that one heard of all these years. Where is it suddenly emerged from?
Yes, so I think, I mean, that's a great question. So I think obviously it wasn't the three ideological projects of the Hindutva forces were, of course, you have named each UCC, Article 370, and the Ayodhya Babri Masjid Ram Mandir issue. Correct? Those were the three ideological pillars, which were the stated pillars. Waqf was not one of those. But two of them, I guess the forces have achieved, right? In 10 years in power, they have been able to sort of bring that to their logical end. UCC is also in the play at the state level now. So, for a force, for any political force, but certainly for a right wing, a political force such as what the RSS and BJP are, you need to keep on finding new ground. So if your existing grounds are exhausted, you're going to need to find new grounds to say, oh, now we have fixed Waqf. So it's also to cater to their ideological base, which is to see we are doing right, we are fixing the people we should be fixing. It's a bit of that. So whether or not what they're doing is useful to anybody, it's also a messaging, and it's part of the same messaging which the other three examples you took. And I think so, therefore, I mean, till the time they're in power, you're not going to have an end to it. Today it's Waqf, tomorrow it will be something else. I mean, they're going to keep on finding new enemies, because in their ideological thing, the minorities in the country are not a welcome lot. They have to be sort of put in a certain place. And this sort of attacking the pillars or the visible elements of what Muslims, minorities generally, when Muslims more particularly, is of course going to keep on expanding. So you can expect more surprises, I think.
Nasty surprises, yes, I would say. But as it is, you may have read about this article that disappeared from the website of the organizer about Christian land, So it's not going to stop. As you said, it's a minority. Minorities are the people. I mean, this Hindutva project goes after minorities, not after one community only. Uh, Tell me, to the extent that you can read what is happening all over the country, sitting in Delhi, uh, how do you think the Muslim community leaders as well as the general populace read these moves?
No, I think it's in. I mean, I can't speak for leaders, but generally, I mean, speaking from people and groups and seeing the reactions, I think it's generally. I think there is a sense that this is a continuation of the disenfranchisement process of the Muslims, which this government has been trying to do through various means. So this Waqf is another mechanism, or the amendments which reduce the element of control of the community itself on the Waqf properties, is another mechanism for disenfranchisement of the Muslim communities in India, and I think that is one. Second, of course, is that there is an element of course, on this, on that aspect. I am speaking for myself. I'm not particularly against it, to be honest. Is that you brought in other Waqf, like your Bora Waqf. You specifically define Bora Waqf or some other Ahmadiyya Waqf in this act. That is all right, according to me. I think you can have subsects within a religion. Nothing is a monolith. Neither is Indian Islam or Indian Muslims a monolith. They are different groups, and each group should get recognition within the religion. I'm not particularly against that, but generally the problematic, and I don't think even generally Muslim groups, even Sunni groups or anybody like that, is necessarily against that bit. It's really the lack of control and the attack in terms of the real chance of losing those work properties. Is what is troubling people, and they see it as a continued disenfranchisement, which has continued more aggressively. I mean, it's been happening relatively aggressively in the last 10 years.
Politically speaking, the bill was passed with the support of the two main allies of the BJP, without which it will not be able to run the government. That is Nitish Kumar's JDU and Chandrababu Naidu's TDP. Now, interestingly enough, both those leaders represent states where there is a strong Muslim population. Perhaps less so in Andhra Pradesh after the bifurcation, but certainly in Bihar. So, will this have a real impact, politically speaking?
Yes, I'm not so sure on Andhra Pradesh, but yes, for Bihar, I think that JDU historically has enjoyed a good amount of Muslim support in terms of in all elections, both national and state elections. At least 30% or thereabouts of Muslims, 25-30%, have voted for JDU. RJD is the primary choice, but a substantial chunk vote for JDU. I think in that context, I do see, and there is Muslim resentment in terms of, it's a bit of that, you had the ability to engage with this government and resist it because you are a coalition partner, and you failed to do it. So I think there is a strong resentment against the JDU, and that's also reflected in some of the representatives of JDU who have resigned, saying because their positions became untenable given the kind of support JDU gave and facilitated this whole process for the government. And of course, you have Bihar elections coming up later in the year in October. So I think it's also gonna. I really think that it's gonna actually have a very negative electoral impact on JDU's chances in the upcoming elections in Bihar.
The challenges that have come so far have been by some politicians. Am I right? The cases
No, there have been challenges. There have been challenges. I mean, challenges have been continuously filed. See, some of the initial challenges, in fact, were filed. The first one was filed even before the act received presidential assent. So it's not technically an act even. So I would say, in that sense, they were possibly a little premature. You have to wait for the act to be notified, at least presidential assent, and then gazetted for it to be challenged. I anticipate a large number of challenges. They were, of course, by by Waqf groups, by mutawallis, by members of Waqf board. A large bunch of those have filed. There are members of parliament, both Muslim and people who are from other religious denominations who have challenged. And I anticipate in the next 1 week there will be multiple challenges which will be filed. So it will be, I think, in terms of the petitioners, you will have a whole host of challenges by the time the Supreme Court is closed for the next 5 days. So anyways, it will come only Tuesday or Wednesday, the earliest, next Tuesday or Wednesday. And I anticipate a whole host of challenges from a whole range of society will be there before the court even on the first day.
Yeah, I think I read somewhere, I may be wrong, but I read somewhere that the Supreme Court plans to bunch all of these into one case.
No, they'll have to hear it together, of course. I mean, it's the same challenge. Of course, people will take different grounds, and they will have to also then. Let's see what the government has also filed a caveat. So, government will also have a position on the first day. So, and then a more substantive hearing will be required. The idea is, I mean, one hopes that in matters like these, the earlier the resolution of the hearing, the better it is. Because very often, in a lot of so many matters we have seen, matters are filed and then they lie there for years. That's not ideal. It's a matter of the moment. You should try and hear it within a reasonable time, whatever, 3-6 months, maximum a year, and then try and sort of get it done with.
Looping back to something you said earlier, this is a golden chance for this is an excellent chance for opportunity for the community to look at how the work properties are being managed. Do you think that's going to be the case, or do you think that it may just slide back to status quo ante or the way things are or something?
I think there'll be a bit of that case. I can't say that there'll be a complete change, because see, what has happened is that because of this act, the focus has been brought on that, right? So it's a very strong moment in that sense, which has brought the focus on Waqf. So if it was not there in the mindset of the community, the fact of enactment has brought it in the mindset. The fact of enactment has also brought it in the mindset that although you may not be treating, you as in when I say that the people of who are running these Waqfs and the members of the Muslim community, you may not be treating it as important, but guess what? Somebody else is treating it as important for it to be taken away from you. So the fact is that you should be treating it more important than you are actually, because somebody else sees the value of it more than you do. So I think it has had a I think psychological sort of impact on. And you do see a lot of comments. A lot of people are commenting that, there is a problem in the way it has been managed so far, and you have to correct it. And if you had used it to the extent possible, a lot of other things, because there is so much resource in the Waqf, so you could have used it in a very, very, prudent manner for improving the socio-economic condition of the Muslim community in India, and for other ancillary purposes, education, health, all of that. So I think it will have some impact. Will it be complete change? I don't think so. But will it bring the management of Waqf more in focus in at least a large number of areas? Possibly, yes.
What's the overall number of, there could be tens of thousands, is it?
Yes, there could be a lot of them. And each state has registered numbers. So it could be, some are small, some are just small graveyards, some are this thing, some of course are prime land. So there are different kinds of Waqfs, right? Like some will be not very consequential in terms of what they can do. Purposes are also different of the Waqf. So it is a whole range of things. And I think that data also, to the extent is registered with the Waqf board, it's in terms of land, dead property which is donated to Waqf, it's reasonably substantial.
Okay, so that really, I mean, now we've got to see how the challenges are and how seriously the Supreme Court moves on them. And that's how it will proceed. But we've covered this ground, we've understood. There was a lot of confusion. I mean, when you say what, people do not understand what the whole thing is. They just say it's something associated with the Muslim community and then move on. And it is, of course, something associated with the Muslim community, but there are nuances in between. You mentioned I'm just winding up, but you mentioned the Sambal mosque thing. My sense is that perhaps any time there is a political action against a particular mosque or another graveyard, as we are seeing with poor Aurangzeb's one small grave, it could go any which way. So I think it is in that sense a notable notable decision that the government has taken from its point of view. And there is, of course, a political dimension to it also. Thank you so much, Shadan, for helping us clarify this complex issue. We will be back next week once again with another guest on the Wire Talks.